Greetings, fellow Salt Ancestors, and welcome to another video on solo RPGs. Today I want to talk to you about something a little special called Tales of the Burned Stones. It is so exciting, in fact, I decided to flex my Manicam muscles so I could show you some of the PDF as we go along, because this game is actually, as of right now, unavailable in print, and I didn't want to print it on, crappy printer paper. So Tales of the Burned Stone is actually designed by a fellow Canadian called René-Pierre Desgelina, who is a bit of a, also fairly a presence in the indie designer scene for RPGs. He produces a lot of open source, open license content. He encourages others to build on this game, promotes community, promotes collaboration. He's a great guy. But beyond the great guy, because he's made a number of games, also, but this one is, in my opinion, something really special. You might, if you have watched my intro video, you might recall that I mentioned that roll to resolve is not really my thing and that, dice aren't really that exciting for me. Well, meet the exception to the rule. This game is so good, I love it. I will roll to resolve my way through it, and I'm going to enjoy every little moment of it. And I'm going to show you why. It is defined here as a solo-friendly, dark fantasy role-playing game of journeying and dungeon delving. An incredibly apt description for what is going on in this game. Very solo-friendly, very dark fantasy. And yeah, you journey, you dungeon delve, you try to stay alive, really. The combat in this game is actually extremely deadly. So it's also something I like about it. Like, it's not to be taken lightly. You have to fight, absolutely. But sometimes you may want to try to come up with a workaround. So the game actually intros with basically a poem and some art, which sets the scene for the world of this game, which I'm going to summarize as thus. There is I'll say a generic fantasy world. Everything was going well until a volcano erupted, unleashing basically an army of demons onto the world that took everybody by surprise and proceeded to burn and kill everyone. So now the world is covered in ashes, everything is burnt, everything's been destroyed, it's all remnant of society. Most people lost their lives, in fact, including the player. In this story, you, the player, the character, has died, and you were brought back to life by a group called the Sisters of the Eclipse for reasons that are not defined in this game. And in fact, the author invites you to define those reasons for yourself. And that is something that Fari RPG, so that's the company for René-Pierre, Fari RPG, generally speaking, likes to do, which is leave it open for the players to build the lore around the game. And a good way to do that is to do the intro. So I'm just going to do this little part here. I promise I'm not going to read you the whole book, although this video is likely to be longer than usual because there's a lot of gears in this one. But I want to showcase this because I think it will really sort of convey what the game is about and how to work this game. So it starts off as follows. The world of Tales of the Burned Stones is a living and breathing universe that existed before you decided to explore it. To get an idea of what happened in the world right before the start of the first session, discuss the following questions as a group. Your answers will help establish what is true in this fiction, highlight who you are, define some current problems in the world, and provide hints as to where the story could go next. So first question. We are souls lost in a cataclysm that struck a few years ago, a few months ago, or just a few days ago. The Sisters of the Eclipse brought us back, but their promise of life had a cost. We cannot die, losing more of ourselves after each reawakening. Our presence brings misfortune the longer we stay in the same place. The price we paid for this cursed life remains shrouded in mystery. Change forever. We possess abilities beyond the mortal realm. We can either sense the presence of demons, withstand demonic flames, or banish fiends back to the abyss, provided we have the right materials. Now, interestingly, that's all that's mentioned about materials in this entire game. So it's an invitation for the players to define this as part of their game, as part of their quest. Feared and reviled by most, we are either alone, there's only a few, or there is a legion of us, with our purpose yet to be revealed. The ashes bring sickness to most, but to us we can use it to brew an elixir that grants swiftness, an elixir that imbues unbreakable strength, or that expands our perception. Finally, with each drink, we have to relinquish a memory. And it is a memory of those closest to us, the places we called home, or fleeting moment of joy. So again, this is really good about conveying the darkness of the world, what's at stake, and how we can maybe approach the world we're in. So as a solo player, I found this an incredible way to already start imagining the world. These questions are brilliant, in my opinion, to get people started on their quest. So we're gonna go up here, some playing material, some instructions. I think I'm gonna skip ahead over to character creation because that is something that I think is worth showcasing. I mean, obviously you're welcome to read the whole thing. There's a little bit more world building. There's a few ideas thrown around. But I think the important part right now is to discuss characters. So the first thing you do when you roll a new character is to roll your resilience, which is basically your health pool. And to do that, you roll a d4 plus 2. So if you can math, that's 6 health point maximum. So when I say that this combat situation is deadly, it is. So in this case, my character would have a resilience of 4. I was fairly lucky when I created my character. I got a 5. Then you roll for coin, which uses a d4 again, but you multiply the result by 100, so you could start off between 1 and 400 coins. Then you are encouraged to roll on a heritage, or you can invent your own, or you can choose. Again, as a solo player, unless you really have no firm position, I think that the logic thing to do is to choose, but you could go from gnome, halfling, dwarf, elf, human, or orc. These don't come with any particular mechanical advantages, they're just flavor. And then you are encouraged to roll for a background. That definitely has a little bit more of a gameplay impact. We have soldiers, which are fierce and commanding, striders, agile and resourceful, guardians, powerful and astute, druids, mystical and attuned, alchemists, creative and precise, scoundrels, sly and stealthy, sorcerers, wise and arcane, and minstrel, which are charming and entertaining. And your class, basically, is what I will call it, the background in this game, will let you choose a certain set of abilities for your character. So in my case, I went with a strider, which is basically a ranger, you know, by any other name. The bullseye allows me to, that's a bit tricky to explain while going to combat, but it gives me an excellent position when I am doing something that requires precision. I'll walk you through that. So, after we have done that, I will show you the skills quickly, I think. Follow me. So for example, here I'll take Striders because I was just looking at it. So you can see there's 3 different abilities. They each have a different cost. Cost is basically stepping down a die, and I'll explain what that means. But if you, actually I'll explain what that means right now. Here, let's move back. Getting ahead of myself. Too excited, people. Too excited. Okay, roll your skills. So I mentioned there's 3 main skills: strength, dexterity, willpower. So what you do, take a d8, a d4, a d6, and you roll them. Ta-da! The dice that is furthest from you is the strength. The one that is closest is the willpower, and the one in the middle is the dexterity. In this case, it's a great roll for my strider because I would want my d8 to be assigned to my dex. You are allowed to switch the result of 2 dice. So I might in fact decide that I want the d4 to be my strength and the d6 to be my willpower. The numbers I actually roll on these dice do not matter. What matters is which die is assigned to which, because the way this works is that when you are making use of a certain skill, you will roll the associated dice to it. And what's going to happen is once you use a die, you will step it down. So for example, if I'm doing something that requires dexterity, like I'll say climbing a wall, for example, I will roll my d8 to get my result, and then I will note a d6. And until I rest or, you know, take a breath, as the case may be, the next time I use dexterity, I will roll a d6. therefore lowering the odds of a very positive outcome and increasing the chances of a negative one. This is a very cool mechanic, in my opinion, to show sort of like how you get fatigue as the day goes on, as the encounters pile up and that sort of thing, and emphasizes the need to rest. So that is very cool. I also kind of enjoy the whole, using the physical location of dice as you roll them. This is not the last time that you will see this in this game. This is actually how one generates a dungeon. So we'll circle back to that. So those are the skills. Rolling for your weapon is also an option. And I will show you here the weapons. Now they do say specifically that this weapon is a D6, so you can ignore everything else. Weapons work like skills, by the way, so when you use them, they also step down. So you go from a D6. If I used my bow, I will go down to a D4. Now I have a strider. I did not roll for my bow. I decided that I was actually just going to choose it because, again, I'm a strider. I need a bow. Most items are not like your starting one. A starting item is what they call, what is the word that they used? I'm sorry. Lasting item. There we go, a lasting item. So lasting item means that, again, once you rest, you can step up your die again. So a bow of a D6 bow would step down to a 4, but if I rest, I can set it back up to a D6 again. Most items that one will come across were forged after the event or not as good quality as the good old days. Once you roll a D4 and you get your result, the item is simply broken and you have to discard it. So a lot of items have a set number of uses, unlike your starting item, which will always be available to you. And there are some advancements you can have, that lets you, for example, step up a skill or step up an item all the way to a D12 at some point, through basically what is leveling up. So we have skills, we have items. They are used to do various checks. There's also such thing as a loot die. Well, I guess we'll circle back to that, but it works the same way. It starts with a D12. As you loot, you step it down. So again, decreasing the odds that you'll get something really cool and increasing the odds that something not so good would happen. Grit is actually a one-time use per, I'll say, rest period. So again, you have to rest to reset it. And it lets you roll a D12 instead of any other item that would be applicable. So when I was saying earlier that using a skills means you have to step down so many things, it means you have to choose a die and step it down when you use it. So I'll do a little bit of a demo in a moment, but let's just keep going. After you have chosen your weapons, you can roll some details. So there's a lot of tables in this game that helps you, again, flesh out your character. It's very neat way to do it, not just the physical characteristic, but all the way down to what motivates you, what might be a flaw or a financial background or your virtues. So it's a good way to get into your character's head. Again, you don't actually have to go ahead and roll for this. You can look at the list, you can choose, you can go with what you're feeling. But either way, this is just a really good way to not start with a blank page. I'm just going to skip through the abilities to go over the skills and the checks so I can demonstrate what I just tried to explain, sadly just making you stare at this character sheet, which is not ideal. So, your skills. Strength obviously refers to physical power and toughness. Dexterity to agility and finesse. Willpower to mental abilities. So it could be anything from reason, solving problem, that sort of thing. The effectiveness of a skill is basically which die you roll to make use of it. So when you do a check, so a check can be anything that involves combat, an obstacle, anything at all. For the sake of this demonstration, let's just say that I have to jump over an abyss. It's pretty big, it's a little scary. I would probably have to rely on my strength to do it, which is probably not a very good idea for me, so I may want to look for another way. But let's go with that for now. So basically, I would pick a skill or an item to use. So I don't really have an item to use other than the skill of strength. So I would do that. And I would roll the die that match its current rating. So my strength, even at max, is a D4. So I would roll it. Now, before you end up rolling the die, you have to decide which position you are in. And this is a very interesting part of this game, which is when you're attempting this feat, how are you? Like, am I freshly rested? Like, did I just wake up next to this abyss? You know, I've been thinking about it all night. I'm feeling good about it. You know, I'm pumped. I had a coffee for breakfast, as the case may be. Maybe I'm rolling from an excellent position, in which case I would perform the check by rolling the appropriate dice twice and picking the right result. Now, if I'm just good, you know, with a good sleep, no coffee, however, and I'm still a little bit apprehensive, maybe it would be defined as a good position, which means that I would be performing the check, but I would step up my dice. So my D4 would actually turn into a D6, and that's the one I would use. If it's fair, then you would use the dice as you should. If it is bad, then you would have to do it twice, again, roll twice, but take the lamest result. And dire is basically to the point that you can't do the check. You need to change something about the world first, change your position, change something. And you will see here, it says you can use grit whenever you want, basically, but once only until you rest again. This defines resilience, which I think I've defined basically as your hit points. So when you have a complication, it's possible that you will lose hit points. So that's one way to do it. Hindrances is another way to get a negative consequence, and that's pretty cool. So hindrances would be indicated here in your character sheet, and you have minor and major. Minor usually can cure by just a simple rest. Major might take 2 rests. Hindrances is what I think of as the things that can actually affect my positioning. So I'm poisoned, I'm exhausted, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm moody, I'm sad, I'm upset, I got drugged, whatever. These hindrances I find are a very cool way to let you think about what your positioning might be. So say that for my jumping off a cliff over the abyss or whatever I was at, I would technically roll a d4, but I had a good night of sleep, I just got up, I'm feeling limber, I'm going to step it up to a d6. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to roll it, and I'm going to go back up here to show you the results. Here we go. So it is a 3, which is not the absolute worst, actually. 3 means that I succeed, but there's a minor complication. So a minor complication could be a minor hindrance, or maybe I just took a 1 hit point loss. So I'll show you later, there is a table, there's actually several tables you can use to help you define what the complications might be. But for the sake of this, I will say that I jump, I made it, but I just cut myself, I semi-dislocated my shoulder on the way up, or when I cut myself off the ledge, I managed to pull myself up, snap my shoulder back, but now it kind of hurts, so I'm going to bring my resilience down to a 4. Alternatively, I could have twisted my hand, maybe not taking a hit to resilience, but it could be a hindrance. And I could have said basically, you know, tender wrist, for example, as a minor. But when I'm trying to draw my bow later or use a dagger, for example, if I get into a combat, I probably can't do it from an excellent position because my hand is going to be damaged. So that's basically the way to tie fiction with mechanics, and I think it is very well done. So hopefully you're still with me for all of that. Lots of talking on this one. Let's talk items. So I've mentioned earlier that the starting items are lasting. That means that when you get them, you can actually, once the rest period, restore them to their former dice roll versus some that you do not. There is also loot that is available. I also mentioned that the loot dice steps down also. So you start usually with a d12 die loot. Between 1 and 2 is where you go, there's trouble. So instead of finding loot, you find something not good. Otherwise, you basically get a depletable item that ranges from a d4 to a d12 value. So that's basically how loot works. Resting, as mentioned, is how you can reset your dice. So this allows you to reset all of your skills. So strength, dexterity, willpower, your loot die, your grit usage, and you can do the minor hindrances, and you can probably clear off a major, but you'll still keep the minor out there. So that is how the system generally works. there is the concept of projects, so you can see them here. Project is how the game encourages you to create more lasting items, usually through forging them. So there's a system here for basically creating new items. I haven't really done that part, so I can't speak too much to it. I have to say that crafting is not usually something I'm deep into, but I do appreciate that it's there and I might get around to it. Challenges. Challenges is basically anything that is an obstacle, and in solo play, it is actually how they recommend that you resolve combat. So, a challenge lets you resolve a situation that cannot be solved with a single check. They might also be used to handle combat encounters when playing solo. When facing a challenge, you have to make a number of checks and need a set number of successes to overcome it. Use the following table as a guide. So then there's a little table here that says how many checks you need, successful checks you need to do to defeat a certain type of challenge. So it goes all the way from 3 to 13. Now I want to say playing solo, 13 successful checks on a resilience of 5 is something. It's something because again, with each passing check, you're downgrading your stats. So it's difficult. It's a difficult game in the sense of things have a cost and you're made to feel it. And I think that's partially why I like this game a lot. I feel that, like, you know, the feeling that nothing is free is very present here. So for example, if I were fighting a bandit, I think they would probably have a challenge. I'm going to say 3 for a bandit, I'm not sure. So how that would go basically for combat is, okay, fiction. I'm actually walking down the path when I hear voices ahead. And I decide to approach cautiously because that's the kind of elf strider that I am. And I see that they have just killed someone and are basically going through the corpse's pocket. I'm not really down for that. I decide to attack before they have a chance to. So I decide to use my bow. And because I managed to sneak in, I think I'm going to do it from an excellent position, which means that I would roll my d6 twice and take the highest result. Now, another interesting thing that this game offers, so I'm skipping over the combat rules because again, they're not recommended for solo play. The encounter resolution system works much better for keeping the whole situation focused. But one thing that's really helpful in setting up the position also is the question oracle, which is a system that you can use to confirm something, right? So sometimes it might feel like cheating. Well, I think it makes sense that I should be in an excellent position because I'm an elf in the forest and like I snuck up. But if you're not sure, you can say, okay, game, can you confirm whether or not I was successful in approaching, or am I in an excellent position? And this is based on how likely you think it is. So if I say, okay, is it likely that I'm in an excellent position right now? I'm well rested, so there was no abyss jumping over. I'm well rested, all my skills are maxed, I heard the voices way ahead, I snuck in. I think it's pretty likely that I would have managed to sneak, apologize, but up to that point. So I would roll a d10 and see what the result is. So I roll my d10, I get a 9. And anything above a 5 is a yes and. So do you think I'm in a excellent position? The answer is yes, you are in an excellent position. And in fact, they have no clue you're there at all. Couldn't do any better. Cool. So I would then approach this check from an excellent position, meaning I would roll my d6 twice, choose the highest result. Based on that result, I might succeed, and like I might super succeed. I might succeed with a negative, or I might not succeed. Actually, I say not succeed, but I should point out that in the check resolution, there is the option for basically on a 1 or a 2, the answer is you do not succeed, or you succeed with a very bad consequence, which I think is very cool in solo play particularly, because there are situations where I feel I need to make a check to accomplish something, but I legitimately have no idea where my story would go if I failed. Like I'm trying to open this door to the secret vault I really needed. I need to succeed, but it's difficult. So I roll a 1 or a 2 and I'm like, I don't succeed, or I succeed with something. And this is where, in my game, I ended up losing both resilience and getting poisoned, majorly poisoned, actually. So it was a very, very bad consequence, but it allowed me to keep the story moving forward, which I think is, again, a very cool thing to include in this game. Don't worry, we're almost at the end. But there is journeying. So journeying is basically how you get from point A to point B. So say you're in the forest, I just off a bandit, and I'm on my way to a human village. Then I would decide how far I think the destination is. If I think that it is very far, then I would use a bigger die, like up to a d12. If I think it's a very close by journey, I would roll a d4. And then based on that, I would see how many potential encounters I might have during my journey. So in this case, despite the fact that I rolled d4, I scored a 3, and a 3 would speak to 2 events in my journey. Then we would move on to the journey die. So twice I will roll during the journey event, because I said up to 2 events. And what I would do here is roll my journey die, which again usually starts at 12. Roll it and get the result, in this case an 8. So anything 5 plus is the path is clear, all is well, no problem. At 3 and 4, there is an inconvenience that hinders. And at 1 and 2, they would be a major threat. Now a journey die, like all die, step down. So basically after I roll my d12, I would go down to a d10. And if there were 3 events, then I would go down to a d8. Again, increasing the chance of an actual, I'll say a negative encounter situation. And then lets your journey be basically 1, 2, 3 little scenes, and then you reach your destination. This is, I think, the last big thing I want to show you before I hit the tables, which is dungeon exploration. That's one thing. Dungeon generation tends to be a little bit tricky when you're playing solo, trying to come up with a map, trying to come up with a system, and this does it in a very interesting way. Allow me to produce a blank page. First thing one does, get a d20, roll it. That will be your current position on the map. So this is the entrance to the dungeon. Then what you would do is roll a d4. Roll it, get a 4, it lands here. That's going to be the next area of the thing. And then you would keep stepping up your die until you roll a 5 or above, which is the goal. I should mention, before you create your dungeon, you usually have a goal, right? So you're either rescuing someone, you're looking for a particular loot, you're trying to slay the big bad, whichever one it is. On the 5 plus, you find. So that's my d6 is a 4, so we go to a d8, which is a 7. I'll just move it up for the camera. So then what I would do is here, this would be the door. So this is where I come in. This would be a room that would connect as such over here and down to here, like this, creating a quickie dungeon map. Now, this might seem very short dungeon, so I mean, one thing that I have done is actually say on the 5 plus, I find stairs and then generate another level. So then you can keep making it bigger, but you're never quite sure how long it's going to take. If you roll a 1 or a 2 on your map, your presence would be directly opposed. On the 3 and the 4, like I got here, you would be looking as an obstacle. So again, this could be like there was a cave in or something. Or if I'm rescuing someone, maybe there's a guard right here. I mean, might not attack me right away, but it's definitely there, right? If my presence is opposed, then it would basically jump me and I would have no way around combat. This would just be, however, maybe I can talk them into it, maybe I can bribe them into it, maybe I have no idea what I could do with this guard, but say that's an option. 4 is another one like this, so that would be blocked by an obstacle. Maybe there's like a really creepy, like, I don't know, spider web. Yeah, spider web here. And I have to figure the way around the spider web. And maybe if I can't do it right, then maybe a really, really bad thing will happen, like a spider will show up, which I would not enjoy. So that could be an obstacle. And here on the 7, I would have the goal. So this would be what I was after in the first place. So you can do that. And then you can also use the second oracle, which I don't know if I actually showed it to you in full, but it's basically a peril oracle, and it lets you see how dangerous the journey is, and it can make checks more dangerous also. So it's one way also to spruce up your dungeon and make the dungeons a little creepier than it otherwise would be. There is then a sell and salvage option. So again, if you find loot you don't want to keep, know what to do with it, there's some instructions for that. And then we can just go into the tables and general guidelines. So again, guidelines is generic. I say generic if you've played RPGs before, but not everyone has, but basically how to play RPGs as a group and even solo. And these are the tables I wanted to show you. So if you look at the complications table, so again, you do a check and it's a yes. If you do a check and you have a complication, or even if you do an oracle, yes and yes no, it can be a way to come up with exactly what didn't go according to plan. And I like the way that this one is built because you can either start with a mechanical disadvantage or a fiction disadvantage. So for example, on a mechanical, maybe you lose a hit point. And then you as a player would try to come up with a story around it. But if you find that harder to do, you can but I made a wrong assumption or I forgot a detail. And based on that, I get a hindrance or I lost an item, for example. And you can do it if you were forceful or quick. So this is a good way to match how to come up with a complication with your actual playstyle. Another thing that this game does is to help you generate names, which I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this because I don't know if you noticed from my character sheet, but I can't even name myself. I'm just so bad at it. So we have elfic clan and dwarf houses and human guilds. There's name for villages. And then we have here locations, which is a good way to start, by the way, because again, you're plunking yourself in this game. Where do I even start? Well, friends, start by rolling a location. You know, roll a d12, find some adjectives, find a bit of a different kind of type of location, and then you're good to go. You can also find regions and weather. Also can be helpful when you're trying to imagine your scene. There's a table to help you define your threat. Again, as mentioned, you want to be mindful when you are playing solo that a boss of 21 resilience is going to be, I don't want to use impossible, but you know, you want to wait till you had a few moments to also level up before you face that. Then there's tables to create a community, which I think is awesome because again, you know there's a village ahead because you need one in your fiction, but is it a hamlet? Is it a city? Is it a metropolis? So you can roll. And you can also roll for the population, which is cool. Like I rolled a city, but then the population was desolate. So you're like, okay, so it's a ruined city. Like there might be a couple of stragglers there, you know, that sort of thing. There is a table to help you define NPCs. Very, very neat. So it defines their age in terms of appearance, their background, how well they present themselves, what their motivation might be. And again, that's a very cool tool because if your non-player characters have motivations and flaws, it's easier for you to predict how they react to you. Same thing with their reaction here, hostile, unfriendly, uncertain. Like once you roll these things, it's easier to interact with an imaginary person because you just kind of gave them life and gave them purpose. So these are excellent tables for solo play. Then there's some price table, which is helpful, you know, because if you find a dagger, like what is that worth? Is it even worth a meal? Well, it turns out that it is. Some services, some conveyance and transport. So again, good ways to help build your fiction. More names, more calls, some artifacts. So again, if you're finding loot, perhaps you will want to have extra ideas. And finally, sparks. Sparks are basically random but highly evocative words and later verbs. And that can be helpful when you're trying again to define a scene or come up with something. Like I found a city, like what's the city about? Like, is it about war? Is it about peace? Is it about money? Like, you know, so I think in this one I'd roll something like, I think it was power and deceiving or something. But anyway, the idea is that you take these words, they're a bit weird, but then you can go like, oh yeah, that city, you know, used to appear very powerful, but it was all a sham. It was just an economic thing, you know, it was pretend. Once, you know, the trade routes were destroyed, there was nothing left, for example. So these sparks let you come up with ideas on the fly. And again, this game, even played multiplayer, is intended to be build the fiction as you play. So in that sense, these sparks table are amazing. So finally, we have a bestiary with a couple ideas for opponents. So that's always very helpful also to give you an idea of how to face threats and you know, how strong something should be or should not be. So this is not enough people to basically like fuel an entire solo game, in my opinion, but it's very good for inspiration as to how to think of your enemies, mechanically speaking. Finally, we have a bit of an intro adventure. So if you really don't want to get started, this gets a backdrop for you. So it's one way also to kickstart an adventure. If you're new to generating your own plot, this could be an interesting way to start because the history is a bit more fleshed out. They fleshed out a bit of a city. They throw ideas of people that live in that city around, so that can, again, kickstart your imagination one step forward. And so that's it. That's basically Tales of the Burned Stones. It is very, very good. One thing that I'm going to do actually for this one, because again, trying to explain this, maybe I lost half of you like 20 minutes ago on how to play it. I'm going to link to a solo play video that another content creator has made. He used the actual combat rules to do his encounters. I think it's clunkier than the way that it is recommended, but then you can also see that in action. But you can see him use those sparks table, use different tables, the oracles, how to run the checks, like you can see it all live, and how well it all comes together. This game is highly recommended for me. Again, I'll put a link below. Can't recommend enough, and you don't have a whole lot to lose. So if any of this sounded at all interesting, I encourage you to go check it out. And on that note, I will wish you a very good day.